All right, so here's my number one. Number one from 2019, the stuff that I've seen clients struggle with, and it's kind of an interesting one. So I'm going to take a slight spin on it.
Okay.
So of all either my clients or more, perhaps even more importantly, their team members, so their direct reports that have left in 2019, they've left for either one of these two reasons, if not both. One, and I don't think this will come as a surprise to anybody listening. One, not feeling appreciated or valued. So, and not by money, by someone actually appreciating, acknowledging their effort, feeling valued and appreciated. This is the Brandon Smith Show, and of course, I'm your host, Brandon Smith, and the entire purpose of this show is one singular thing, and that's to help you live a life that much more free from dysfunction. So here we are. We're rounding the corner from 2019 to 2020, and whenever we round the corner of a year, I like to spend some time to kind of think back on the year and what kind of worked, what didn't, what maybe patterns I've noticed. And so today's show is going to be a lot about those patterns that I've noticed, particularly with all the leaders that I've worked with. But I thought, why bring just my perspective when I could bring probably even better perspective? And so I brought my good friend and colleague, Randy Hain, on the show. Randy, so good to have you back.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, and so I was joking. I don't know what number show I've had you on, but this is definitely a number something close to 10 at least. I mean, we're getting up there in the number. So Randy, just so the folks that maybe have not been listening for very long and maybe don't know who you are. So you're president of Servient Partners, and just like me, you're an executive coach. And just like me, you've got coaches across all different functions, all different industries, men and women alike that are trying to lead either the businesses or other people.
Yes.
And so I reached out to you and said, all right, Randy, I want you to put together your list of maybe top 3 things you've seen your clients work through, your leaders work through this year. And I've got my kind of top 3 here. And I thought it might be good for us to kind of go compare and contrast our lists.
I've been looking forward to this.
Really looking forward to this. I can tell.
I have.
And so what usually happens, so for those of you that have listened to our exchanges before, you'll notice we end up with more similarities than differences. Even we don't plan it that way. We really truly come in with different lists, but we end up with more similarities than differences. I don't know if that speaks more to our similarities or to patterns we see, but I don't know what's going to happen this time. So we'll just have to see. So Randy, I am going to start by asking you for your number 3. What was number 3 on your list?
When I think about all the leaders I worked with this year, I put a lot of thought in this list. One of the most common themes, and it's quite frankly every year, it's not just this year, has been lack of personal self-awareness. Lack of personal self-awareness.
Personal is this like that old Seinfeld episode, the close talker? That would be personal space.
Close talker. It's when folks just don't really understand how they're coming across to others.
Okay.
It's they are in a meeting and they say something and they don't really understand that people are rolling their eyes and looking at their iPhones. It's when people don't mean to be harsh and critical, but they leave people feeling badly after they walk away from a meeting with them. It can cover a number of different things, but it's that lack of awareness of how I'm coming across to other people, how the impression I leave upon you when we're together. I think it's a lot of that. So when I'm working with clients that struggle with personal awareness, obviously, just like you, at the beginning of a coaching engagement, we do a very extensive 360 process. So I'm going to interview somewhere between 12 and 20 people that know this individual well, and I'm asking them a lot of questions about how they view this person, the perception, and from that, and from Berkman assessment, and from our time together, I'm able to help that person really understand this is how you are seen. Now, maybe 80% of it's spot on, 20%'s not. But by and large, this is going to give us a really good understanding of how you come across to others. So I find the lack of self-awareness is a real challenge, but there are ways to combat it, as you well know.
So, all right. So let me ask you this question.
Sure,
so
sure.
their lack of self-awareness, so they may not be aware of the fact that they've offended somebody in the meeting, or said something that maybe didn't quite land the way they wanted it to. Are they help me understand the difference between, and help our listeners understand the difference between, there's lack of self-awareness, which all of us can be maybe a little bit have that be a challenge for us at times. What's the difference between that and coachability?
That's a good question. Now, I think when you think about when someone has an executive coach, for most of them, it's their first time working with a coach. Now, there are some exceptions, but by and large, most of the clients I work with, I may be the first executive coach they've worked with. So it's also, in my experience, this is probably another show, where there's a lack of candid feedback that goes on in business. People are not really giving each other good, insightful feedback about who they are, how they come across, whatever. So picture them working with a coach for the first time. And usually we are the ones that are helping them understand that they have a self-awareness issue. So I think that working with a coach maybe for the first time, maybe one of the first times you've started to go down this path of understanding how you come across to others. But the other part of your question, which is very interesting, is are they coachable? And that's one of the key questions I ask every client at the beginning of an engagement before we ever sign the scope of work. Are you coachable? Because I tell them we're going to get uncomfortable. This will not be a lot of attaboys, attagirls. It's not going to be wonderful at times. It's going to feel difficult and painful because we have to look in the mirror and understand the self-awareness and other things that we need to work on. So asking people if they're coachable is always a key question. I've had one person in the last many years say they were not coachable.
Oh, so they actually told you?
They actually told me, you know what, now that I think about it, I'm probably not ready to be coached. And I appreciated the candor. I really appreciated the honesty of it. And we decided it was not the right time to engage. But everyone else, when they think about it and understand what's going to be asked of them, are willing to embark on that journey with me.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So great. So, all right. So number 3 for you is that lack of self-awareness.
Lack of self-awareness and just finding ways to help the client address it in a practical, meaningful way. And it's changing behaviors. It's changing perceptions. It's just changing how I show up and how people see me.
Yes. I'm going to share my number 3 in a minute. But before I do that, I want to ask one more question around this.
Yes.
Do you think this is getting worse, better, or the same? So you think about lack of self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
If it was 2018, would you be saying the same thing, or 2017? Or is this something that is a little more stark for you in 2019?
I think it's getting worse, considerably worse.
Why?
I think, and you and I have talked about my sort of take on candor. The lack of candor is really pervasive in business. And I think that's only getting worse because people are not necessarily having these honest conversations about who we are, how we're showing up, how I'm coming across, getting the necessary feedback. I think that's only getting worse, which means that the lack of self-awareness, in my view, is getting worse. So I think every year I've seen maybe a slight decline in people's self-awareness. The good news is when they can sit down in a confidential, helpful way and kind of talk about how they're coming across and point things out, I think that people can rebound. I think they can course correct. But I do think it's getting worse, in my opinion.
So the antidotes really get candid feedback from a trusted source.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
So what's your number 3?
My number 3. My number 3, and this is one of the things I've seen from my kind of leaders, particularly important for folks that are kind of director level and above, not intentionally working to align with other leaders.
I like that.
So they're like, nah, I just want to play in my sandbox. I really don't want to learn about your sandbox, and I definitely don't want to share my toys.
So working in silos, lack of collaboration.
Yeah. So specifically, what it would look like is two specific behaviors I don't see that I wish I did see. They are not having lunches with peers. No lunches. Like, nah, why would I go to lunch with her? Like, I don't want to do that. So they're isolating themselves a little bit more. And they're not, this is where it's actually that one doesn't necessarily get leaders in trouble directly. The second one does. Not supporting leaders publicly. If anything, doing the opposite.
Okay.
Like, well, if marketing would just get their act together, saying that kind of stuff to their team. So they're not working to kind of align and collaborate and partner.
So let me ask you this. So when you encounter people that struggle with this, it's a form of self-awareness, right? That they don't understand that they're not doing it, or they don't understand that it's important. When you talk to them about it, confront them about it, how do they respond?
You know, it's funny actually. They all say, "I know it's important."
Okay.
Well, let me back up a little bit. they all say, I know it's a good thing to do. I don't have time for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see why that would be more important than, say, spending time with my team.
Mm-hmm.
So they recognize on the surface that it's important, but in the prioritization of things in their life,
Mm-hmm.
they always drop at rock bottom.
Got
And then what happens is, because of that, then politics form, silos form.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you and I could probably have a whole other show, but, when I'm working with a senior team, just like when you work with a senior team, when I'm kind of evaluating the team dynamics, often the teams that I experience are, most of them are what I call level one in terms of functioning. Level one functioning is characterized by respect,
Mm-hmm.
but no alignment.
Okay.
So it's kind of like, I respect you, you respect me. Now don't ask me about anything that I do.
Okay.
And I won't ask you anything about what you do. So there's no accountability, there's no candor, there's none of that.
So when you point this out to them, are you giving them sort of a goal? The purpose of doing this better is to get over here. Are you giving them something to move towards with this?
Yeah.
And do they understand the value of that?
Yeah, so usually it's them identifying those 3 to 5 key stakeholders or other leaders that they need to align with.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's marketing, they better be really aligned with operations.
Mm-hmm.
And because those two are very connected and they impact each other. So it's identifying those other partners that it's important for them to, other departments and functions that those partners represent, that's important to align with, so they can be more efficient and effective. Because when they don't do that, inevitably, somebody works on something that doesn't let anyone else know, and then it causes a month or two of problem solving or firefighting. So it actually helps them become more efficient. So I could try and help them see the business reason for doing it. And then the tactical thing is, just like you preach, get lunches on your calendar. I actually schedule it. And
do you find that they, is there any nervousness or frustration with, okay, I get the need to do it, but I don't know how to do it? Do you get a lot of questions about the tactics?
Yeah, so I actually will then write out, here are the 3 questions you need to ask your peer.
Good.
Good. And so they come with their questions, and then they usually say the same thing to me. They say, it was really awkward sitting down with this person because I don't really know them. And then after we started talking, I got to know them, and then I learned about this thing they were working on, and I had no idea. And actually, that thing directly impacts us. And had I not known about that, we were going to have a major problem in about 2 months.
Isn't it funny how the power of curiosity sort of unlocks this whole thing? If you just go in with questions, don't try to show up and be perfect. Don't try to show up and have all the answers. Actually start with questions.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just that a good mentor of mine taught me years ago, and I still hold on to it today. We all hold a piece of the truth. So trying to get them to see, hey, they've got a piece of the truth. They've got a puzzle piece you need. So have lunch with them. You might learn something. So that's my number 3.
I like it. More
leaders did that, things would be a little smoother. Okay, Randy, you're number 2.
So my number 2 may not surprise you, and I'm curious to see your take on this, but an addiction to busyness. I don't have a single client, and haven't in many years, that would not complain about, I get too many emails, I have too many meetings, I just have no time during the day to do the things that really matter. So it's this addiction to busyness that is a constant struggle. Even carving out time to have our coaching sessions, sometimes can overwhelm them. So I definitely feel like that's a real issue, and it has been for many years. This year in particular, I think there's just the pace of business, and the clients I work with it seems exponentially higher this year for some reason. So helping them sit down and think about priorities is really, really important. Actually taking a look at how do you handle your workload? Can I actually look at your schedule for a couple of weeks and understand where you spend your time? Do you really need to be in all of those meetings? What is the purpose of you being in those meetings? Who's calling those meetings? We could have a whole show on dysfunctional business meetings. We should sometime. But so helping them understand the inefficient use of time. And there are so many important things they need to do. They need to invest time in their teammates. They need to work on strategy. Heck, they need to do their day job, but they're in meetings and answering emails and everything else. And the other thing that's a real challenge is so many of them struggle to turn it off. The workday is not 8 to 5 for them. Sometimes it's 7 to 7 or longer. So I think that addiction of busyness is a real challenge.
So I want to hone in on, you used the word, and used a couple of times, word addiction, meaning they like it, or it's giving them some kind of a payoff.
Mm-hmm.
So why?
It's like a bad drug.
Why? What's the payoff? Why is this? Because we often think about calendars, and too many people complain. They'll say, "Oh, this person scheduled it on me," or they, other people are overriding my calendar, and it's like it's happening to them.
Mm-hmm.
But the word addiction's more like, no, I'm actually seeking that out. I like it.
Well, I know that chocolate chip cookies are bad for me, but I've never walked past one and not had one. I mean, I can't walk past a plate of cookies and not have one. So I have an addiction to chocolate chip cookies. I know it's bad for me, but I'm not going to give it up. I'm just telling you right now.
Yeah.
So I think that work busyness is a lot like that. So I think that people that kind of get into the flow of their work and they get more responsibility and they feel the only way to get ahead is to kind of go with the flow around them. That's part of the problem. It's not just an individual issue, it's a cultural issue. Companies that have leaders that have email issues or meeting issues, they're not by themselves on an island. It's part of the culture. That's how we do things around here, right?
Yeah.
I think that the addiction is fed by their surroundings, and also they don't want to stand out as the guy not playing along. They don't necessarily want to be brave and make courageous choices around their calendars and say no to meetings. So it just feeds this, yes, I use the word addiction.
Yeah.
So helping someone uncouple from that, maybe in the bubble of our coaching sessions, and say, look, calm down, take a breath. Let's just talk about your day, and helping them understand what priorities look like. You mentioned investing time and alignment. I always preach the rule of 15 because people always say to me when I talk about relationships, I don't have time for that every single time. So I teach the rule of 15. You have 5 lunches, 5 breakfasts, 5 lunches, and 5 dinners a week. So you have 15 meals. You can pick 3 or 4 of those a week to insert someone where you can spend time with them. But that helps really busy people kind of get it into their heads. But I'm telling you, I think that this is a major issue. And if we have this show in 10 years, it's probably going to be on my list.
Yeah, really interesting. You were talking and immediately made me think of, I had a leader I talked to last year, and she said, she's kind of moved past this, but she said there was a point in my career where I had a sense of pride when I responded to a leader on a weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Or late at night.
Yes.
Like, look, I'm still working.
Well,
it was this kind of this badge of honor, like, I'm always on.
Well, something that feeds the addiction is, to your point, we are always on. It's a badge of honor. And sometimes as leaders, we don't understand that by sending the email that we really don't care if you respond or not, we are sending an email that I'm on, and the person receiving it probably assumes I need to be on too. So even though you have this very innocent 10 o'clock at night email thing, you just want to empty out your inbox, you're sending a signal, I'm working, and they have to interpret it as they will. So we have to be thinking about the signals we send with our business.
Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful. Okay, so I'm going to hit my number 2.
Yes.
After the break. So stay tuned. When we come right back, I'm going to hit my number 2, and then, drum roll, Randy and I are going to do our number 1s for 2019. Number 1 things our clients have struggled with in 2019. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Here's your coaching minute for the week, presented to you by the Leadership Foundry. Dysfunction in the workplace, it's a pervasive problem. Here's a simple tip to eliminate dysfunction, both in your team, but even in the environments around you. Clarify your team members' roles, goals, and responsibilities. So just spend some time thinking about, does all of my team know? Does each of them know what their role is, what the goals are of the team, and their responsibilities? If the answer is yes, you right there eliminate 50% of all the dysfunction that could come up in your team. If the answer is no, think about how you could do that better. When we don't do that, one of 2 things happens. Either people overlap work and they step on each other's toes, or you have one person carrying much bigger load while a couple other people are hanging out not doing near as much work. It's one of the big problems in the nonprofit world is a lack of clarity around roles, goals, and responsibilities. So focus on those 3 things, and I promise you, not only will you eliminate dysfunction, it's going to make your workplace that much more enjoyable. All right, welcome back from break. Okay, so hopefully you've been taking some mental notes for yourself on what are some of those things that maybe you've been struggling with that Randy and I have been talking about. So we've been given our list of our clients' kind of top 3 things we've seen in 2019 that we've seen leaders that we work with, or we've just heard other leaders struggle with. What are some of those themes and patterns? So, Randy, you gave your number 2, which was addiction to busyness. Mine is going to be a version of that.
Okay.
And so it's going to be all about this. So I'm going to give you the first version of it, and then I got a part 2 to it.
Okay.
So part 1 is with leaders, the difficulty with being an editor and not an author. And what I mean by that is in the seat of leader and direct report, there's always one person who's the author and one person who's the editor. Okay. And in a perfect world, and if you want to maximize your use of your time and be the highest and best use of your role as a leader, you should be the editor. And so it makes perfect sense when you think about it. So you think about all your favorite all-time direct reports. When there was a problem or issue, they probably came to you and they said, hey, Randy, there's an issue. Here's what I think we should do about it. I'd love to get your thoughts. They're authoring and you're editing. And you're not so highly effective direct reports, you're less than effective ones, would come to you and say, hey, Randy, there's an issue. What do you want me to do about it? And then if you're not careful, you jump in and you're authoring and now they're editing you. Like, well, it's not my fault. It didn't work out. Randy told me to do it that way. And I find my leaders really not only struggle with that distinction, but they like being authors.
Oh, yeah.
They like being the heroes.
Yes.
I was interviewing an owner of a business, retail business, a few weeks ago, and he said it was part of a larger retail chain. So I was interviewing him for this presentation I'm doing, and he said his advice was, you got to be real careful to not be the hero, because when you are the hero, you're creating chaos. You're reinforcing it because you're just telling people just come to you for all the problems and solutions, and then you'll just do it all. And I find that people really want to be the firefighter and the hero, but they're not equipping their people below them to step up. And it's kind of an addiction to busyness.
Yes.
It's the addiction to that high of I fixed today, I solved the problem, when they need to be kind of equipping their folks below them.
And then they wonder later, why am I always bogged down? Why can't I elevate myself? Why am I always in the weeds? I mean, you kind of hear these things. Well, how often are you actively taking over your employees' work? I mean, how often are you doing the job for them? And I find that's often the case.
Yeah. When really the antidote is simple and hard. The antidote is simple. When someone comes to you and says, it's really this simple and this hard. They come to you and say, what do you want me to do about this? How do you want me to fix this? You should pause and say, I tell you what, put your best thoughts around that. Come back to me tomorrow. Maybe put it down on a page and let's talk about it. And then we'll figure out what next step forward. Make them put some thinking into it. Make them author so you can edit. Just requires a little bit of pause and patience. But that's, like I said, simple and hard.
Have you been in the room for some of my conversations with my youngest son? That's exactly how I do it.
That's exactly. Wow. This is parenting too.
It is.
So I told you I was going to flip this one.
Okay.
So I also find my clients struggle with being editors and not authors. And here's what I mean by that. So when they are then going up to their boss, they need to be authoring and putting their boss in the editor seat. They need to be going to their boss and treating that conversation. Be prepared for it and treat it like a trusted advisor. Hey, boss, here's what's been going on. Here are 3 options and the cost benefit of each option. I'd love to talk these through with you. So put your thinking down on paper and take it when you communicate up and take that to them versus just saying, what do you want me to do about that?
Do you find that your clients sometimes struggle with that dichotomy? You act this way here, but you've got to, kind of think differently about working with your boss. Is there a challenge that you've seen with your clients, or do they get it?
I think they get it when they teach so what happens is if they are teaching their direct reports to author and they edit, then they get that they should be authoring and putting their boss in the editor seat. Okay. But when they don't do that, then they allow their directs to treat them like authors, then they think their boss should be the author. So then they go to their boss, what do you want me to do about it? And consequently, they don't look strategic. They don't look like they're prepared. They just don't look like they're ready for the next promotion, frankly. So when you operate like an author and put your boss in the editor seat, you're signaling to him or her, I'm prepared, I've got my stuff together, and I'm ready for the next role. And it's funny, when I get my clients to do that, it's not uncommon they get promoted within about 6 months because their peers aren't doing that.
What's the role that really good communication plays in all of that? Like really good, open, honest communication. I mean, how critical is it, and do you find that that is one of the first things you have to really, kind of coach them on, is the need to communicate openly and clearly when they're going back and forth?
Yeah, so it's really important to clarify their expectations down.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's where clear communication is really important.
Mm-hmm.
So to their directs. And this is kind of like coaching. Like when you come to me,
mm-hmm.
you should come prepared.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's me trusting you in your thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to talk through that because I value your thinking. So you need to communicate why.
Mm-hmm.
So communicate your expectations and why. When you're communicating up, it's slightly different. It's not so much about communicating your expectations as much as coming in with very structured communication, structured thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Because part of how you're being evaluated by a senior leader is your logic. How structured is your thinking? Do you come with a very, clear, is your thinking clear?
Mm-hmm.
I had a leader several years ago who I was working with. He was a VP of tax, and he reported to the CFO of a very big company. And her issue was like a lot of folks that learned a background that was very detail-oriented,
mm-hmm.
like
mm-hmm.
accounting, he literally, Randy, you would have choked on the documents he would give her. He would give her a document, and it would have 50 to 100 bullets on each page. And it would be like 3 pages of 50 to 100 bullets, not like sub-organized, like an outline, just like straight up 50 bullets.
You lost me at tax.
Yeah. And he would do this and be like, here's all the important stuff. Yeah. But there's no structure, there's no organization, there's no,
mm-hmm.
he's not leading his leader.
Right. He's sharing data.
He's sharing data, but
mm-hmm.
he's not advising. Mm-hmm. So how do you treat your leader like they're your number one client?
Mm-hmm.
Because they are.
Mm-hmm. That's a great perspective.
They can decide to renew your contract or not. So you treat them like a client. You come to them with a client document that's there to direct them and guide them and lead them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my number 2. It's that author-editor distinction and knowing what seat to sit in. And if you do it well, it can save you so much time. If you don't do it well, it's going to cost you lots.
I love it.
Okay, so now we are at number 1. What's your number 1?
I think it's going to be a slightly different variation of your number 3. So
okay.
My number 1 is underestimating the value of building trusting stakeholder relationships. Underestimating the value of building trusting stakeholder relationships. So one of the things I do with all of my coaching clients near the beginning of the relationship is we do a little brainstorming session on identifying who are all the key stakeholders that you serve. They can be under you, they can be peers, they can be clients in the organization, outside the organization. Let's make the list. So once we've identified who they are, I've actually developed a tool called a relationship audit template, where I give them this very handy form where they can go in and grade the quality of the relationship with each one of these people. And typically on a scale of 1 to 10 is what we focus on. Anything less than an 8, we want to put together a very specific plan to help them improve it. But one of the things I find interesting is helping them understand why this is important. So I just start asking questions at the beginning of the relationship. Are you as influential as you'd like to be? Are you having the influence that you think you should have in the organization? And if I get yes, I'll ask why, but I often get, well, not really. Well, let's talk about why you don't. And often it's because they're operating in silos and they're not investing in building relationships with their colleagues. So helping people understand the importance of this is really critical, but I go much further and I help them actually break them down, and then we work on specific actions to make each one of them better. And much of it's what you identified. You have to invest time. You have to go have meals with these people. You have to be vulnerable. You have to be willing to talk a little bit about the things in your life that aren't going well. It's not all happy days, everything's wonderful. You have to be personal.
Yeah.
You have to be authentic. You have to be curious. So I'm teaching some of those basic building blocks of relationships that you and I've talked about many times, and we both do in the Leadership Foundry. But as I'm working with people, I find that just the lack of understanding at the very beginning of a relationship that this is really part of my job and I can't be successful long-term unless I do it, that's usually a switch that I have to help them flip on.
Yeah. So do you find, is there a certain kind of seat or that they struggle with in recognizing the importance of more than another? What I mean by that is, like, do they tend to overlook peers, or do they tend to overlook senior leaders that are more diagonally from them, or is it other stakeholders? Or is there no real theme and pattern to it?
No, actually, it's a great question. I think within the vertical of, let's say, their particular operating unit, so their boss, maybe their peers, and maybe their team, I think there's a general decent awareness that I need to make sure I've got good relationships there. But you used the word earlier, silos. I think we're talking about silos and collaboration.
Yeah.
But getting outside of my vertical to play well in the sandbox with marketing, with sales, with finance and accounting, with HR, and building relationships with my clients, my stakeholders in each of those organizations or departments, that's where there's a big letdown. That's where people are not putting enough energy. And you have to help them understand that if you want to be a successful leader and truly grow your career, your influence in your vertical is going to limit you unless you expand it. You have to be willing to go outside of that and truly build an organization-wide series of relationships. So I find that the lack of understanding and the lack of willingness to do that's kind of pronounced at the beginning, but we usually bring that down and help them understand it and give them the tools to do it.
Yeah, I love the way you set that up too, that I had never really thought of, but it's so simple and so brilliant. And don't know if this is exactly how you said it, but this is how I interpreted it in my brain. Was almost thinking about those key stakeholders and then rating them first on a scale of 1 to 10 on importance, and then rating them second on how you're doing on each of those. So if you got one that's an importance of 10 and you're a 5, that's a problem. You might have another one that's an importance of a 5 and you're a 5, and that's okay. But you're looking for those gaps. I love that. I think that's so simple.
And there's so much in my coaching around role play. Because I find that, I asked you earlier, are you equipping them to go to these conversations? We spend a lot of time on essential tactics. What do you say? We were sitting down across from your boss's boss who's granted you a meeting, and you know that you've got to have a relationship. What do you say?
Yeah.
So I find that that's where we put a lot of energy, but it's extremely helpful.
Yeah. The tactics is really important.
Yeah.
That's what, eventually, because that's what people are going to then go try and do.
I've been writing scripts for 20 years, and I just find that people need the language.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so here's my number one. Number one from 2019, the stuff that I've seen clients struggle with, and it's kind of an interesting one. So I'm going to take a slight spin on it.
Okay.
So of all either my clients or more, perhaps even more importantly, their team members, so their direct reports that have left in 2019, they've left for either one of these two reasons, if not both. One, and I don't think this will come as a surprise to anybody listening. One, not feeling appreciated or valued. So, and not by money, by someone actually appreciating, acknowledging their effort, feeling valued and appreciated. We've known this. I could have said that same thing in 2018 or 2017 or 2016. We can go back in time on that one. The second one is a little bit surprised me this year, and that is not having enough development conversations with their leader. Not development opportunities necessarily, development conversations. So what they're telling me is, hey, I don't feel valued. And more importantly, she's not taking the time to talk to me about my development. So I'm leaving. It has nothing to do with money. Even though we're in a job market where you could go out and make 20% more, people are leaving because they don't feel valued. But most importantly, they're not having development conversations with their boss, which goes back to busyness, addiction to busyness. Because if you're addicted to it, you're not going to make intentional time for those development conversations.
You know what's interesting about that is it's really easy for us to make an assumption about what you just said. Oh, well, that's probably our younger colleagues. I think it's every generation.
I would agree.
Everybody needs to be developed and feel like they're valued. Everybody. It's not just our younger colleagues.
I think that's a really important call out and exactly true. Like I said, it's all my clients and their direct reports, and it doesn't matter what age. I've had folks in their mid 40s, even early 50s say, I don't feel like I'm growing and being developed. So I'm moving on. I'm not having the development conversations. And the key is the conversations. They're not saying opportunities. They recognize opportunities are subjective to the wins of the organization. There may be resources and growth, but there may not be. But they want the conversations.
Can I tell you a quick appreciation story? It's very quick. It just happened this week.
Of course.
So change the names to protect the innocent, right? So my client had been struggling with really engaging with his team, just really struggled. He was talking at them. He wasn't listening. They just didn't feel loved. Okay. And he had a very large team. So I convinced him just before Thanksgiving to try something. I said, I want you to trust me and I want you to do it, and you're going to hate it, but I promise you it's going to have a great result. I asked him to write notes of gratitude and appreciation to every single member of his team. Handwritten notes, individualized. Something special about that person. Hey, here's what I just want to let you know. I appreciate all the work you did on the blank project this year, or I love your smile, or I love all this stuff. So anyway, it was probably like 25 notes that he wrote, and he took the step, I didn't tell him to do this, of putting a little gift card inside of each one. And he gave it to them. Well, I knew he promised to do it, but I hadn't seen him since this week. So this week it happened. He walks in, he said, okay, I don't know what happened, but it's unbelievable. I've gotten the greatest reaction. Every time I go to their desk, my note is sitting on their desk, which kind of freaks me out. But they really loved it, and they keep talking about it. And there's like a whole sea change about their attitudes toward me. Why did that happen? I said, well, you showed appreciation and gratitude. You took the time to write a note. You gave them a gift, which is a nice add-on, by the way. And he said, guess what? We're actually going to go do this BMW driving experience. I want to take my team up to Greenville to do it. I said, well, that's next level. But he has now gotten addicted to this idea. When I show appreciation, my team is more engaged. And it was an epiphany for him. So it just happened, and it was a big breakthrough.
I love it. Great story. Great story. If he does that and the development conversation once a month, and I told even people with the development conversation, it doesn't have to be hard. You can simply say, hey, once you get in a rhythm, you can say, hey, what did you learn last month? Let's talk about last month. Mm-hmm. What'd you work on? What'd you learn? What do you want to focus on this month? Mm-hmm. And how can I support you? Mm-hmm. Done.
Yeah.
There it is.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be some big, where do you want to go in your career in 5 years? It can be that, but it can simply just be month to month. Mm-hmm. What'd you learn? What are you working on this month that you want to focus on? And how can I help you?
I like your famous street signs with start, stop, and continue. What are you going to start doing? What are you going to stop doing? What are you going to continue doing? It's something basic.
Yeah. I used that at home with my kids last night. See, it all comes back to parenting.
You're a tough dad.
Yeah, maybe. Well, if my kids were here, they might agree with you, actually. All right, Randy, I always ask this question of you. You know it's coming. Ready?
Yes.
Life hack. What's a life hack for how we can live our life more free from dysfunction?
Okay, I'll try to make this short. I want to talk about the normalization of defects. And let me tell you where this comes from. If you recall the tragic Space Shuttle Challenger explosion, and before that, the Columbia Space Shuttle explosion. Well, NASA, when it did its deep dive into why this happened, they discovered that the flaws, the defects in both shuttles were actually well known within NASA and the science community and the managers. They all knew, but they said, you know what, we don't know why it's there. It doesn't seem to be causing a big issue, so we're just going to ignore it. Well, we both know that both cases ended in tragedy. Well, when NASA kind of put its results out there for the public, they called it the normalization of defects. So here's the life hack if you're a business leader. I want you to think about applying that thinking to business. What are the defects that you have normalized in your business? Where is someone saying, that's just the way we do things around here? Where is the behavior being excused for someone that maybe is a top sales performer? Where is the lack of candid conversation? You can find these pockets of defects all over if you'll just take the time to think about it. Now, once you've made your list and you've identified what these normalized defects are, the real trick is to say, what am I going to do about it? Yeah. So then starting to work with your team to attack those defects and eliminate them. But this idea of saying, what are the defects we've just said are okay, where are the flaws in our company, and why are we tolerating that? Why don't we identify it and then move forward and try to get rid of them? Yeah. That's my life hack.
I love it. That's beautiful. So if people want to learn more about you and what you're up to, where can they go?
I would encourage them to go to serviumpartners.com. Follow me on LinkedIn, and also check out my Servium Partners YouTube page. We do a lot of helpful videos, very short videos on a lot of the topics that you and I talk about.
Yep, and what we haven't talked about yet, you mentioned it once, is a Leadership Foundry.
Yes.
So you and I are the co-founders of Leadership Foundry.
Yes.
So we've kind of come together and brought our kind of resources and ideas together to help companies and teams get better at growing their leaders. And so they can even check out our site, which is myleadershipfoundry.com.
Yes. And there's going to be some exciting stuff in 2020 coming.
There is going to be some exciting stuff.
Stay tuned.
So stay tuned. That's right. We've been putting our heads together on some creative ways to bring resources that make it easier for our clients to grow and develop.
Very exciting stuff.
That's what we're all about. Yeah. Well, Randy, awesome. Thank you. Have a great Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. I know we're kind of right up to that. And for you listening, thank you for listening and watching. Of course, continue to keep up the fight against workplace dysfunction every week by watching our show if you can. And if you haven't checked out my latest revised workplace therapist site, check it out, workplacetherapist.com, theworkplacetherapist.com, where I've got books and resources there just for you. And if you're not listening on iTunes, please listen and rate, review. And if you haven't subscribed, of course, subscribe so we can get more folks to join the tribe. And so until our next show, have an awesome week. Have a great week and an awesome life. I always mess that up. Great week, awesome life.